In the earlier lesson, we were able to successfully establish connection with TWS, and we were also able to execute this app.run method on a new thread. Now, there's one more important logic we need to add to our script, and that is to pause our script until we receive connection acknowledgement from TWS. So what happens is that when we send a connection request to TWS, TWS takes some time. So it might take half a second before it actually establishes connection with a Python application. So if we send any request before that connection is established, then it might get some errors. So to add that logic for waiting or pausing our script before the connection is established, we're going to make use of a method in the eWrapper class that is called next valid ID. So if we search for this method, def next valid ID, here is the definition for this method. So this method is triggered automatically whenever a Python application is successfully able to connect with TWS. This method passes this variable called order ID, which is of type integer. And this order ID, as we will see later on, is used for making any requests like placing order or requesting historical data. And this will become clear later on. Right now, we are going to do something much simpler. So let's copy this line and we will override this method in our trading app class. So let's paste it over here. Let's remove this variable type as well. So before defining this method, let's create a property inside a trading app class, and let's call it self dot next valid order ID, and let's initialize this value to none. And now what we are going to do is inside this next valid ID method, we will set this property self dot next valid order ID equal to the value that is passed by this method. So what will happen is before the connection is established, next valid order ID is none. And once the connection is established, whatever value is passed inside this order ID variable will be assigned to next valid order ID. And this is how we are going to check whether connection with TWS is established or not. We will check whether next valid order ID is none. If it is none, then we will pause our script. And once this next valid order ID becomes an integer value, that is whatever value is passed by this variable, then we will exit the pause and continue further with our script. So we are going to make use of while loop to do this, to build this logic. So let's write here waiting for TWS connection acknowledgement, and let's use a while loop, and inside the while loop we will check whether app dot next valid order ID equal to none. If it is none, we will stay inside the while loop, and let's print waiting for TWS connection acknowledgement. And once the next valid order ID becomes an integer, we will exit the while loop, and let's actually change this print statement to connection established. Let's save the script, and now let's go to TWS and also open the terminal. So I've already activated IB_API_env environment, and I'm inside the code directory. So let's run this connection.py file and see what happens. So let's see what happened here. So when we sent the connection request, our script went inside the while loop until that next valid order ID is none. So we kept on printing, waiting for TWS connection acknowledgement. And once we came out of the while loop, it printed connection established. And finally, we got the messages that we have seen earlier as well. These messages are sent inside the error method that gets triggered when TWS is able to connect with a Python application. -1 means that it's not actually an error, it's just a notification. And these messages tell us that the connection was successful and data farm connections are also okay. So going forward, we are going to use this script as a starting point for any application that we build. So keep this script handy with you.